Rhythm and blues is one of the most influential and enduring genres in modern music, with roots deeply embedded in African American culture. Over the decades, R&B has evolved and adapted to societal changes, musical innovations, and cultural movements, creating subgenres and inspiring countless artists across multiple genres. From its early days in the 1940s to its dominance in contemporary pop and soul music, R&B has maintained its importance as a vital form of musical expression and cultural identity. Here, we trace the origins, development, and evolution of R&B, highlighting key artists, social contexts, and musical innovations that shaped the genre into what it is today. The origins of R&B can be traced back to the African American music traditions of the early 20th century, particularly blues, gospel, and jazz. During the 1940s, as the Great Migration brought millions of African Americans from the rural South to urban areas in the North, a new kind of music began to emerge in cities like Chicago, New York, and Detroit. This new sound combined the emotional depth and storytelling of the blues with the energy and rhythms of jazz, creating a genre that reflected both the struggles and triumphs of African American life. The term rhythm and blues was coined by Jerry Wexler at Billboard magazine in 1947 as a replacement term for race music, which had been used to describe African American music. The term R&B reflected the growing sophistication of this new genre, which was marked by a stronger emphasis on rhythm and more complex arrangements compared to earlier blues styles. Big band and swing elements were still influential in R&B, and early R&B bands like Louis Jordan and his Timpani Five in the 1940s blended jazz, blues, and boogie-woogie, creating a danceable and upbeat sound. Jordan's hit songs like Caledonia and Choo Choo Boogie helped establish the foundation for what would later evolve into a more commercially viable form of R&B. Meanwhile, artists such as Ruth Brown, known as the Queen of R&B, also brought a vocal-driven style that combined blues, gospel, and jazz influences. By the early 1950s, R&B was becoming increasingly popular with mainstream audiences, and it began to evolve into a more distinct genre. The sounds of doo-wop, soul, and gospel began to emerge into a unique form of R&B, where vocal harmonies and emotional expression played a central role. One of the most important developments during this period was the emergence of Motown, a record label founded by Berry Gordy in 1959. Motown would go on to define the sound of R&B in the 1960s, with its distinctive Motown sound, which combined lush orchestration, tight rhythm sections, and catchy melodies with powerful vocals. The label's artists, such as The Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and The Temptations, produced some of the most memorable and influential R&B music of the era. Motown not only brought African American artists into the mainstream, but also helped bridge the racial divide in popular music, with many of its songs crossing over into white audiences. During the same period, Stax Records in Memphis became another key player in shaping R&B music. Artists like Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, and Isaac Hayes represented the Southern soul style, which was grittier, rawer, and more influenced by gospel and blues. Stax's house band, Booker T and the MGs, and its signature sound, often referred to as Memphis Soul, was characterized by a tight, rhythm-heavy approach with emotive vocals that emphasized the struggles of African Americans in the South. In the 1960s, the evolution of R&B began to include the genre of soul, which was heavily influenced by gospel music, the blues, and the rise of the civil rights movement. Artists like Ray Charles, Sam Cooke, and James Brown were pivotal in this transformation, with Ray Charles famously blending gospel and R&B into a style that appealed to both black and white audiences. Sam Cooke's smooth vocals and ability to blend pop with soulful delivery helped to define the sound of soul, and his song A Change Is Gonna Come from 1964 became an anthem for the civil rights movement. The 1970s saw the rise of funk, a subgenre that combines soul and R&B with a focus on rhythm, groove, and syncopation. James Brown, often regarded as the godfather of soul, was at the forefront of this movement, particularly with his album Sex Machine in 1970, which featured groundbreaking rhythm guitar and bass lines. The influence of funk extended well beyond R&B, influencing disco, hip-hop, and even rock music. During this period, the Isley Brothers and Earth, Wind & Fire helped bring funk to a wider audience, with infectious grooves and socially conscious lyrics. Stevie Wonder, one of the most successful R&B artists of the 1970s, experimented with synthesizers and more complex song structures, expanding the boundaries of R&B with albums like Inner Visions from 1973 and Songs in the Key of Life in 1976. Wonder's music during this period reflected the changing cultural and political landscape of the time, incorporating themes of social justice and love alongside complex musical experimentation. The 1980s marked a significant turning point in the development of R&B, largely due to the influence of emerging technologies such as synthesizers, drum machines, and digital recording. The genre began to blend more heavily with pop, disco, and new wave, leading to the creation of a new, polished form of R&B known as contemporary R&B. Artists like Prince, Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston helped define the sound of R&B in the 1980s. Michael Jackson's 1982 album, Thriller, became the best-selling album of all time, with a mix of pop, funk, and R&B influences. His pioneering use of music videos, particularly the groundbreaking video for Thriller, also helped to redefine the visual aesthetic of R&B and solidify its place in mainstream pop culture. Prince, with his eclectic style and genre-bending sound, further pushed the boundaries of R&B. His 1984 album Purple Rain combined elements of funk, rock, and R&B to create a sound that was both futuristic and deeply soulful. Similarly, Whitney Houston's 1985 debut album, Whitney Houston, combined contemporary R&B with pop and gospel influences, establishing her as one of the best vocalists of her generation. Meanwhile, the New Jack Swing movement, popularized by producers like Teddy Riley, brought a fusion of R&B, hip-hop, and dance music, creating hits for artists like Bobby Brown and Guy. This sound, characterized by its smooth vocals and electronic beats, would continue to influence R&B throughout the 1990s. The 1990s and 2000s saw a resurgence of R&B as artists returned to its roots while simultaneously experimenting with new sounds. Neo-soul, led by artists like Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill, and D'Angelo, became a dominant force in R&B during the late 1990s. Drawing from classical soul, jazz, and funk, neo-soul emphasized live instrumentation and raw, emotive vocal delivery. Lauryn Hill's The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill in 1998 was one of the era's most critically acclaimed albums, blending hip-hop, soul, and R&B in a way that resonated with both mainstream and underground audiences. Simultaneously, mainstream R&B was defined by artists like Mariah Carey, Beyoncé, and Usher, who combined traditional R&B with pop and hip-hop influences. Mariah Carey's 1990 debut marked a new era in vocal performance, with her impressive vocal range and pop-infused R&B sound. Beyoncé, initially a member of Destiny's Child, solidified her place as a solo artist with albums like Dangerously in Love in 2003, blending R&B with pop, hip-hop, and contemporary production techniques. The 2000s also saw the influence of hip-hop on R&B continue to grow, with Chris Brown, Rihanna, and Ne-Yo creating a more contemporary urban style of R&B that appealed to younger audiences. The genre became more versatile, fusing elements of electronic, pop, and even EDM with its soulful foundation. In the 2010s, R&B continued to evolve, with artists like Frank Ocean, The Weeknd, SZA, and Khalid redefining the genre for a new generation. The rise of streaming platforms and the continued fusion of genres meant that R&B had become more genre blurring than ever before, integrating elements of alternative, electronic, and hip-hop music. Frank Ocean's Channel Orange from 2012 and Blonde from 2016 brought a more introspective, experimental approach to R&B, with influences ranging from psychedelic rock to electronic music. The Weeknd, with his atmospheric production and falsetto vocals, combined R&B with dark, moody pop, attracting global attention with albums like Starboy in 2016 and After Hours in 2020. Meanwhile, artists like SZA brought R&B back to its soulful roots, while embracing the free-flowing nature of modern music production. From its birth in the post-war era to its current status as one of the most dynamic and influential genres of contemporary music, R&B has undergone continuous evolution. It has been shaped by technological advancements, social movements, and cross-genre collaborations. Today, R&B stands as a genre that continues to redefine itself, pushing boundaries while retaining its deep connection to African American cultural expression. Its influence on pop, hip-hop, and soul remains undeniable, making R&B one of the most important and enduring genres in the history of modern music.